So the question is this a national trend? You don't want to be paranoid. You don't want to take, one act of violence and extrapolate out and start slandering half the country's population. But there is a theme here. It's unmistakable.
What's shocking is not so much they thought these horrible thoughts, which is bad enough, but that no one's come out and condemned him. It's been absolute silence. And of course, the Democrat nominee, it's just a word salad. She can't even explain it. So it shows you how radicalized the Democratic Party's become. But I think people better get ready. It's going to get a lot worse. And I think that's because you saw the Supreme Court today, the argument about, DEI districts. You've seen this controversy over the mid-decade census. You've seen the redistricting fight. We could pick up 21. If you add all that together, I think the Times is saying on the DEI alone, the racial imbalance, I think the Times has us picking up 12 seats, Politico 19 seats. That does not include all the redistricting fights, which is another 21 gross seats there. And you add in really doing a real census where illegal aliens are not counted. They're never going to take back the House and the Senate. And so you're only going to, what gets me is we're on an arc that they're only progressively going to get more violent. And you can see this in their worship of Mangini, the worship of this, the alleged assassin of Charlie Kirk. So I think it's going to get a lot worse.
Given that, and I hope you're wrong, but I sense you're not, what do you make of Congressman Mike Lawler's response and the governing board of the National Young Republicans organization to these text messages, which I'm not endorsing, by the way, but calling someone a retard or these kids should be destroyed? Like it's an interesting contrast. The Republicans kind of are very quick to shame their own.
They'll always fold. Establishment Republicans will always fold on, as you know this, better than anybody. In any fight, they're going to fold, and they're going to try to be supplicants to the media. They're going to try to be supplicants to the media, a kind of Chamber of Commerce, big donor attitude, that we want to be invited to the parties, we want to be in the club, we want to have the New York Times write nice things about us. That's we're heading towards a civil war.
It's hard to listen to that and not feel something heavy inside. You start to realize this isn't just politics anymore, it's personal. You can see how disagreement has turned into something darker, how silence now feels like approval, and how the very institutions that were supposed to keep us honest have become part of the fight. I find myself thinking about what that means for ordinary people, neighbors, families, friends, who used to share more than they argued about. When truth becomes tribal and justice becomes selective, everything starts to fall apart quietly, piece by piece. And maybe that's what scares me most. The idea that we might already be watching the country we love slip into something we don't recognize anymore.
I don't think there's any doubt. We look at the indices out there, and these are unbridgeable divides right now and getting deeper. And the Democratic Party is getting more and more radical. Look, everything we're dealing with right now is about illegal aliens, whether it's they want to spend $1 trillion on their health care, whether they're demanding a census that counts them for congressional races and for electoral college, whether it's the mass deportations that we're trying to get done in Portland, Chicago, Los Angeles. Everything's around. If they don't have illegal aliens, if they don't have a foreign entity in here and folks in here, there's no way for them to put together the votes. They love democracy, but it's just the math doesn't work. You saw the Supreme Court today. You see these redistricting fights, and the redistricting fights are kind of like the kids in this chat room. If we had enough stones and urgency and maximalization strategy, the 21 would already be up on the table, right? We'd be now executing how you do it. We have to do a whole fight about that. They come up in this paradigm where the established order controls everything, and they want to be part of the established order. And we see that we got here, we've gotten here over 40 or 50 years, and we've won enough times as Republicans, the House, the Senate, the presidency. The country's basically on a cliff of an abyss, and if it hadn't been for Trump, with all his imperfections, the country would be over. It's just going to get worse. We're going to always have, like this thing in Kansas, where they're going to throw, people under the bus immediately and cower and be supplicants and ask for forgiveness for people who are not worthy of us asking for forgiveness. And the fight is going to get more intense. The left is going to get more radical. They're going to go up more the escalatory ladder. Look, Mangini's a hero to them. You got to face and Mondami. He's a Marxist jihadist that's going to win, I don't know, by 15 points or so. In New York City, Sadiq Khan, everything they have is even more radical than you can anticipate. It's getting worse every day. They're not being resolved. There's nothing, and it's really nothing to debate. We have this chasm. And to me, it's the issue I have is that the Trump administration and Pam Bondi and the crew are not moving quickly enough. They had a thing today in the Oval, which was great, about stopping, violence in the streets. That's great, and I appreciate that. But we have to focus on the deep state. We have to focus on taking this apparatus. We only have a short window of time, I think, to be able to do this, and we're not prioritizing it, and we're not hiring enough U.S. attorneys to focus on it, and we're not getting that. If we don't get that done, these statistics we're putting out and the great job at Cash and people and Dan Bon Jr. are doing about arresting bad guys is not going to matter, because you're going to have more bad guys later invited back in by these people. So now it's time to, I think, maximize our own strategy, seize the institutions, and move with a sense of urgency.
Can you give a couple examples of what you think DOJ should be doing right now?
Well, first off, I think DOJ, we got attorneys. I think we got to go back to the beginning. You have to go back to the election. You have to go back to January 6th. Look at Nancy Pelosi. There's a young reporter, Allison Steinberg, over at Lindell TV. She asked Nancy Pelosi a question today about January 6th, about the National Guard, and Nancy Pelosi turned around, screamed at her from a few feet away, "Shut up! How can you ask that?" They're so sensitive about January 6th, so you got to go back to the stolen election of 2020. You've got to go back to January 6th. You have to take the whole continuum. You have to go back to the whole thing on Crossfire Hurricane. You have to adjudicate everything they did, and we have to do it in public. Even throwing the pandemic in there, and the response, the Summer of Love, all of it. If to keep this republic and keep it as a constitutional republic, we have to be fair about this. We have to be transparent about it. We have to adjudicate it by the rule of law, but it has to be done. And you see we're making some progress. You got Comey with a couple of charges on appetizer, John Bolton, maybe with a couple, Letitia James, but it's not good enough and it's not fast enough. And the only way we're going to solve this is U.S. attorneys. I think we're 25 or 30 short is what I'm hearing. There's just some sort of backlog. We have to prioritize everything else we're working on. It has to be to go after the deep state. That combination of national security, intelligence, law enforcement, the Pentagon, its interconnections with Wall Street and big tech, that we have to do that. If we don't go after that and do it now with a sense of urgency, we're never going to have another shot. This is the time we have to do it. We have to make it a priority. And I said, you're going to find out something in this. The third resolve I said was, no, do it now, do it with urgency. And the third was, who's ever not with us is against us. This is the best way we can unmask everybody, because this is not going to be pleasant. It's not going to be easy. You and I you're called more names than I am, but we were both, by the Tel Aviv Levin crowd, we're called everything, right? They're going to do more of that because the deep state is also connected with certain of our allies. You have to go do this, and you have to do it. It's not going to be pleasant. You're going to get thrown out of your country club maybe, but if you're going to save the republic, we have to do this now. And a part of that, you're going to see if you do that, the escalating political violence of the more and more radical left, and quite frankly, more and more of the central apparatus of the Democratic Party, is going to be gutted. And that's why I think, President Trump, I know, wants to focus. Todd Blanche talked about it today in the Oval Office. It has to happen. And it's only going to happen, I think, if people like you and myself and some others keep saying, hey, guys, I understand you got 1,000 things you're working on, but we have to start to rank order priorities, and this has to be the priority right now for President Trump.
It seems obvious that you would start with the FBI, and we now know it's confirmed that there were hundreds of plainclothes FBI agents in the crowd on January 6th. So that changes. That's not crowd control. That's political subversion, and it kind of confirms what a lot of people have been saying for a number of years now, that there was a fake element to that. There were a lot of sincere people protesting what they thought was the theft of the election, but there were also clearly agitators in the crowd. I almost got fired for saying that a couple of years ago. It was obvious to me, but now we know it's true. In fact, it's worse than we thought it was. How many FBI officials have been fired for that? No,
you continue to ask how many have been let go. I think a handful. I don't know. It hasn't been enough to register with any type of head count that OMB is doing, or
right.
budget. the budget increase. Look, I love Cash and I love Dan Bongino. Cash is like a brother to me. But they're two guys hanging on by their fingernails. The same with Pam and Todd. This is why I say the official inside the U.S. Attorney, main justice, you need about another 25 or 30 of these prosecutors. You got to get on with it. The FBI, look, I for a long time have said, I think we got to bifurcate. It's too big, too complicated, covers too much stuff. Like the counterterrorism, you got to bifurcate it. I think you put the counterterrorism, first off, you downsize it and you put it in the intelligence part over DHS, and you have a reorganization of that. This is law enforcement. I'll be tied to U.S. attorneys. We ought to have a much smaller federal police force, which this is. It ought to have a much tighter mandate. We have to have much more control because, look, the scandal of the FBI is twofold. Number one is what they did, and the mentality and the organizing principles inside the FBI that made it that you would do it, and it was career enhancing to do it. In fact, you would not think of not doing it. The whistleblowers were a handful. I mean, I'd sit on the war room every day and say, hey, look, you're not going to be able to use the SS excuse that, hey, I was just following orders. We've only had a handful of whistleblowers. And we know from the other day of even getting this information you're talking about and others talking about came from, it's not that Dan and Cash admit, we don't control it. We didn't get the information. This came through a whistleblower. This came through some person that was afraid of getting wrapped up in this. But the FBI, to me, should be downsized by 2/3.
In this video, Tucker Carlson and Steve Bannon don't just talk about politics, they talk about decay. And honestly, it struck me. The way they describe the silence, the hypocrisy, the fear of speaking out, it feels less like commentary and more like a diagnosis of what's happening around us. You can sense Tucker's unease, that quiet realization that this divide isn't just ideological, it's moral. And Bannon's intensity only makes it clearer, something fundamental is breaking. I don't think this conversation is about left or right anymore. It's about a system that's lost its honesty and a culture that's becoming numb to corruption and violence. For me, it's a wake-up call. Because if people like us stop caring about truth, if we let comfort or fear decide what we say, then maybe the collapse isn't coming. Maybe it's already here.